August 1944. A bivouac area near Avranches, Normandy. The late summer heat is a physical weight. Dust from the passing armor divisions coats everything in a fine gray powder. Men of a black engineer company stand in a long line, their uniforms dark with sweat, clutching empty jerry cans. They look toward the cool, clear stream nearby, where a pump hums. A white sergeant blocks the path. He points a calloused finger toward a stagnant, muddy pond 300 yards downstream where local cattle graze. He tells them to fill their cans there. He points to a wooden sign that reserves the clean water for white soldiers only. The sergeant thinks he has established order in his small corner of the war. He does not know that George S. Patton is coming to turn that order into a very specific kind of justice. This is the story of what happened when General George S. Patton discovered an American engineer company being forced to drink from a contaminated cattle pond while clean water was reserved for white units only. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We tell the World War II stories that show the price of treating soldiers as less than soldiers. Corporal James Tate was 22 years old. He came from the Red Clay Hills of Atlanta, Georgia. He served in a black engineer company, tasked with clearing the debris of a broken continent. Before the war, Tate worked in a bustling freight yard, moving heavy crates for pennies an hour. He enlisted because he believed a uniform and a rifle would finally make him an American in the eyes of his country. He had seen the broken docks of Cherbourg and the hollowed-out, smoking ruins of St. Lo. He had buried 3 close friends in the cold mud of the French coast. He carried a small, frayed photograph of his mother in his left breast pocket. It was the only thing that kept him tethered to the world outside the reach of the army. On a humid afternoon near Avranches, Tate collapsed into the dry dirt. His stomach burned with a fire he could not quench. He had followed the sergeant's orders and drunk from the downstream pond. Now he lay in a dim field hospital, shivering with a dehydration so severe his skin felt like dry parchment. Technical Sergeant Frank Yarborough was 33 years old. He was the water point manager for the sector, hailing from Fargo, North Dakota. Yarborough believed in a strict, unyielding hierarchy that predated the war itself. He often told his subordinates that order depended on everyone knowing their place and staying there. He wore a tailored field jacket that remained remarkably clean and crisp despite the suffocating dust of the French roads. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had never known a day of true physical want. To Yarborough, the United States Army was a machine that functioned best when its parts were kept in different rooms. He stood by the clean, upstream pump with a polished clipboard in his hand. He looked at the handwritten signs he had posted, white units only, with a deep sense of accomplishment. He knew the downstream pond was thick with cattle runoff and black mud. He never bothered to test it in his mind. Some men were built for the spring, and others were built for the trough. It was this calculated indifference that drew a line in the dirt that no one dared to cross. August 1944 was a month of violent motion. The Third Army had broken through at Avranches and was charging into the heart of France. The speed of the advance created a chaotic vacuum. Logistical hubs sprouted overnight in dusty fields. Supply lines stretched for hundreds of miles. In this environment, local commanders and technical sergeants held immense power. The high command focused on fuel tonnages and tank counts. They did not look at the water points. They did not look at the signs. Many officers saw the segregation and said nothing. It was easier to follow the path of least resistance. They viewed the separate water sources as a standard military reality. To them, it was just another regulation from a different era. They were busy chasing the Wehrmacht. They did not want to jeopardize the flow of supplies by questioning the men who managed them. This silence allowed a dangerous system to take root in the Normandy dust. It was a system built on indifference. The consequences were measured in the infirmary. The black engineer company was losing men. 6 soldiers were crippled by severe intestinal infections. 1 was already dead. The medical officers noticed the cluster of cases. They traced the source to the muddy pond. They saw the clean water flowing just 200 meters away. The reports moved quickly. They bypassed the silent officers and landed on a desk, where silence was not an option. The chain of command was finally rattling. At the water point, Yarborough still stood guard over his clean pump. He checked his clipboard and watched the dusty road. He felt secure in his authority. He believed his rules were the final word in this corner of France. He did not hear the low rumble of a single jeep approaching from the north. The zoom-in was about to begin. Captain Marcus Thorne, 34, from Cleveland, Ohio, walked through the shimmering heat. He was a doctor with the 102nd Medical Battalion. His hands were stained with the reality of the last 48 hours. He reached the water point and found Technical Sergeant Frank Yarborough sitting in the shade of a canvas tarp. Yarborough looked cool. He looked comfortable. He was buffing a small scuff on his boot with a rag. "Sergeant, we have a problem," Thorne said. "Everyone has problems in France," Captain Yarborough answered. "I have 6 men with dysentery and 1 in a body bag," Thorne said. "That is a medical matter, sir," Yarborough replied. "It is a water matter," Thorne said. Yarborough tapped a pencil against his clipboard. "My water is clean," the sergeant said. "The water from this pump is clean," Thorne agreed. "Then your men must be eating dirt," Yarborough said. "They aren't my men," Thorne said. "They are the engineers from the downstream bivouac." Yarborough looked toward the muddy cattle pond. "Those men don't draw from this pump," the sergeant said. "Why not?" Thorne asked. "Look at the sign, Captain," Yarborough said. Thorne looked at the handwritten board that said, "White units only." "That isn't an army regulation," Thorne said. "It is a common-sense regulation," Yarborough answered. "The pond downstream is a cesspool for the local herd," Thorne said. "It is where they belong," Yarborough said. "I am ordering you to take that sign down and let them draw from the pump," Thorne said. "You are a doctor, sir," Yarborough replied. "I am a captain in the United States Army," Thorne said, "and I am the man in charge of this water point," Yarborough answered. "The pond water is killing them," Thorne said. "They are used to it where they come from," Yarborough said. "Explain that," Thorne said. "They aren't like us," Yarborough said. "They don't need the same things." "They are soldiers," Thorne said. "They are laborers in uniform," Yarborough replied. "I will report this to the colonel," Thorne said. "The colonel knows how I run my station," Yarborough answered. "Then I will go higher," Thorne said. "Go as high as you like," Yarborough said. "Clean water is for men who fight. They cleared the road for your trucks," Thorne said. "They did their job," Yarborough said. "Now I am doing mine." Thorne turned on his heel. He did not go to the colonel. He knew the colonel would offer excuses about local customs and the logistics of segregation. He went to the signal tent instead. He sat down and wrote a brief, cold summary of the 2-tier water system. He mentioned the death of the private. He mentioned the specific location of the contamination. He sent it directly to the 3rd Army surgeon. He knew that the surgeon was a man who did not like waste. He knew the surgeon spoke to the commander every morning. The report reached Patton within the hour. The dust had barely settled from Thorne's departure when a low, rhythmic thrum cut through the heat. A lone jeep appeared. Moving with a purposeful speed, it stopped inches from the pump. General George S. Patton stepped out, his 4 stars catching the harsh sun. His ivory revolvers rested on his hips. He did not shout. The silence at the station became absolute. Patton walked to the wooden sign. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Yarborough. "Who wrote this sign, Sergeant?" Patton asked. "I did, sir," Yarborough answered. "Where is the water for the engineer company?" Patton asked. "Downstream." "General," Yarborough said. "In the pond. Did you test that water?" Patton asked. "No, sir," Yarborough said. "Do you drink from that pond?" Patton asked. "No, sir," Yarborough said. "Is that water fit for an American soldier?" Patton asked. "I thought it was appropriate for them, General," Yarborough said. Patton looked toward the cattle pond. His voice was low and thin. "You believe there is a difference in the thirst of men," Patton said. "You think a soldier's biology changes based on the color of his skin. You believe one man requires clarity and another thrives on filth. It is a convenient fiction for a man who wants to feel superior while sitting in the shade. The reality is simpler," Patton said. "Every man in this army is a component in a machine that must strike at the heart of Germany. When one part fails because of a sergeant's arrogance, the whole machine slows down. You have slowed down the 3rd Army. Corporal James Tate is dying in a tent because he followed your orders," Patton said. "He cleared the road so my tanks could move. He did the work of a soldier while you stood here playing God over a water pump. He earned the right to clean water with his sweat. You have earned nothing but my contempt. I will not have my soldiers poisoned by the vanity of their own NCOs," Patton said. "This is not a social club. This is a war. In a war, the only thing that matters is the ability to do the job. You have failed at yours." "You have a choice," Patton said. "You will tear down those signs and personally escort every man of that engineer company to this pump. Or, you will be stripped of your rank and spend the rest of this war knee-deep in the filth you sent those men to drink. Decide now." Yarborough did not speak. He looked at the 4 stars on the helmet. He looked at the ivory grips. He reached out and gripped the wooden sign. He pulled it from the dirt with a sharp crack. He stood there with the wood in his hands, his face pale, while Patton watched him. The general did not offer a hand. He did not offer a salute. He simply waited for the order to be carried out. Patton stood by the fender of his jeep as the first trucks from the engineer company rumbled into the station. Technical Sergeant Yarborough, now lacking the stripes on his sleeves, stood at the pump. He was forced to work the handle for every man who came forward. He watched the clear, cold water fill the cans of the soldiers he had previously dismissed. The air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and the sharp, clean scent of the spring. A group of local French villagers stood by the road, watching the American general enforce a logic they did not yet understand. The engineers moved with a quiet, disciplined dignity, their eyes meeting Yarborough's as he labored in the sun. When the last soldier was finished, Patton signaled for a set of shovels. He pointed Yarborough toward the far edge of the bivouac where the latrines were being dug. He told the man that since he had chosen to give soldiers poison water, he would now spend his war managing what resulted from it. Yarborough took the shovel. He felt the weight of the iron and the heat of the Normandy dirt. He began to dig into the rocky soil. Surrounded by the stench of waste and the silence of the men he had once tried to break, James Tate eventually recovered from the dysentery that nearly took his life. He returned home to Atlanta in 1946 and spent 30 years working for the Southern Railway. He lived a long and quiet life, passing away in the winter of 1992. He never forgot the afternoon in Normandy. He kept a small, smooth stone from the edge of the clean spring in his pocket for the rest of his days. He told his children that, on one dusty day in France, a general treated him like a man of worth when the world had tried to treat him like a beast of burden. Frank Yarborough was stripped of his rank and spent the rest of the war in a labor unit. He returned to Fargo in late 1945 and worked in a shipping warehouse until his retirement. He remained a man of deep, silent grudges. He died in 1978, still believing he had been unfairly punished for following the customs of his time. He never realized that the only custom Patton cared about was the survival of the men under his command. He lived his final years in the same gray bitterness he had once used to poison a water source. Patton never spoke of the incident in his public briefings or his personal journals. The report on the water point stayed in a manila folder at the bottom of a field desk. In the margin of the final medical clearance, Patton had scribbled a single sentence in blue ink. It read, "A soldier's blood is all the same color when it hits the dirt, and his water should be too." Some historians argue that Patton's intervention was less about racial justice and more about maintaining the cold efficiency of his war machine. They suggest his actions were purely utilitarian, driven by a need to keep every soldier healthy enough to fuel his relentless advance across France. Others argue that Patton possessed a unique, if blunt, understanding of equality, recognizing that the shared sacrifice of the battlefield rendered domestic prejudices obsolete. They point to his willingness to bypass established social hierarchies when they threatened his mission. What is certain is that the integration of the water points at Avranches set a precedent for equal treatment that many soldiers remembered long after the guns fell silent. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have done the same, or would you have looked for a more diplomatic solution? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about the price of treating soldiers as less than soldiers, make sure you subscribe.